This is a CW Spiral, a podcast run by two Barchies and a Bughead. We're your hosts, Sabrina Reed,
Michael Patterson,
and Reed Gowden,
bringing you history about the network, the latest news, and in-depth spoiler-filled discussions of some of our favorite shows on the CW. Okay, so we are one spiral down this week, but Reed will join us on our next pod. We're gonna start things with Flash. Best to get our grievances and some of our highlight moments from that episode out the way, since they decided to hand us one with no OGs and no leads. That was a interesting choice for the final season.
It was a choice. We'll leave it at that. But I've just recently watched this episode, so I have all these thoughts spiraling in my head. So tell me, Sabrina, what did you think of it?
If you've seen my live tweet, I complained the entire time. But I think it is more so, in all honesty, it's decently written, right? There's not necessarily anything wrong with the episode. It just feels out of place in the final season, for one. And then for two, they made a lot of writing decisions that just didn't quite make sense with what we know about the team. So like Cecile's big arc is about how she feels like she's feeling as a mom. But the sticking point is that she won't be able to make it in time to do Jenna's birthday breakfast. And I was like, why do we need a train? Like, we have a teleporting device and we have Allegra who can teleport you. Like after, like, and then I couldn't get with her story after that. I was like, she's like, I'm a bad mom. I was like, you kind of are now. Because how did we not think of the teleporting? And then she was just eating breakfast all fine at the table with Allegra and Chuck by the end of the episode. And I was like, fine, whatever.
Sabrina was like, you did not think outside the box, Cecile.
She didn't at all.
But I have to say, I completely agree with you. I think it was a very decent episode. I understand the need for these episodes every once in a while, because I'm pretty sure, was it Murder, She Wrote or something, back in the day when they were doing 22 episodes and Angela Lansbury would need a break, they'd have her do these like breakout episodes where she'd like narrate a separate murder mystery that involved characters that weren't related to the show. So she'd appear at the start of the episode to narrate it and appear at the end of the episode to close the narration. And this is pretty much exactly the same as that. We had Barry and Iris in the opening scene. We had Barry and Iris in the closing scene. But in between, it was just the B team, as the fans would call them, part of Team Flash. It was just them solving the crime. And I do think these kinds of episodes can work on TV. And on a base layer, this episode absolutely worked. But the wrong time, the wrong season, and it was doing storylines that, even though I appreciate Cecile's worry about her family, completely appreciated that, but we kind of needed it in last week's episode. She should not have been all cheery about them going off into the countryside. I appreciate the fact they made time for Aftermath, but considering we're talking about the same season that had no time to grieve one of the main characters who was killed off in a subplot, and nobody cared about it because there's a lookalike in front of them, this is not ticking those Aftermath boxes for me. But generally, I thought Danielle Nicolette did a great job with the material. I don't think she gets enough credit as an actress. I think she did a great job with it, and I really appreciate. I did feel Cecile's trauma and turmoil over everything she was going through. But like you said, there were some loopholes that they could have avoided that. These kind of like Murder, She Wrote breakout episodes don't work in a show like The Flash, where there is literally a workaround for every single one of these problems, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. But this was like season 1 or something, or perhaps even like season 2, where we just did not have the technology to be able to circumvent issues that a normal person would have to deal with. I would have been fine with it. But I also think, like, as much as the material works, for Cecile, I was like, I just don't see how she didn't already see how long distance parenting would be a problem with Jenna as young as she is. And that, like, we didn't plan ahead to make it on time for the breakfast for her daughter's birthday. And then I think the show forgot that Cecile has an adult daughter. So I just don't, she was a single mom. So balancing a schedule is something she would have already mastered. And would have known the importance of making sure that your child feels like, even though you have a busy job, that you are around. But the show was like, I don't know who that young lady is. I don't know. Like, we just, and I was like, fine. I think also, to speak to your point about skipping over grief arcs, I thought I don't care about Mark and Frost, but they truly are acting in their scenes. I thought it was a beautiful moment between him and Keon where he is speaking to her about how her kissing him made him think for a moment that Frost was back. And I enjoyed that scene, even in my complaints, because I just feel like it's out of place. But it also makes me like wonder why they chose to have an extended grief arc fronted by Mark for Frost, and no one's thinking about Caitlin. Like they don't
Mm-hmm.
really even mention her. But we have scene after scene after scene about Frost through Mark, who's going through it, and everybody else is like, we miss Caitlin, but she made her decision, and then that's
Mm.
kind of it.
It's amazing that you brought that up because I was watching that episode literally about an hour ago, and that was I wanted to like stay in that moment and stay with that scene because I thought it was a really powerful moment. And like you said, the show hasn't done that much justice to these characters yet. So maybe that's credit to the performance, the music, the lighting, whatever. But that scene was beautiful, and it did let you sit with it. And I completely agree. I also was like, wait, if we're still doing this for Frost, where is the grief for Caitlin? And then they brought up Dr. Carla Tannhauser later on, Caitlin's mom, as though she's just like completely not even minding the fact that she has to do all this research for Keon and hasn't once asked about, wait a minute, my two daughters are dead now. Wait, why didn't you fill me in on this? Like, there's real important storylines to be told here. And I feel like this episode, not even this episode wanted to tell them. The season didn't want to tell them. And that's where the season's
Mm-hmm.
gone wrong. Um, but yeah, seeing the snow come down, the fact we're learning more about Keon, I am growing a little bit more attached to Mark as we go on. If I feel like if they'd been doing this for the last two seasons, I would like him a lot more. But he's kind of just been like snarling and grunting his way through badass one-liners the whole time, and there's not really much to grow there. Whereas now we're finally seeing some depth. Doesn't exactly work after he literally had a heel turn a few weeks ago and turned on the whole team. But we're over that now. That's ancient history, not so ancient. But generally, I like where they're going. I don't know if they're going to set him up with Keon. That would be a bit strange considering she looks like Frost. But I do think they're doing a better job of building them as a potential pairing than they did with Mark and Frost, just because Mark and Frost was very much off screen and they were doing all these wild adventures off screen, so you never really got to know that. But you felt Mark's grief, and I appreciate that because the season has been jumping over far too much. And it's still a testament that we feel this grief almost a season later, but it also does highlight the issue with Caitlin that not a single person has shed a single tear over one of the main characters just dying because, oh, it's okay, her lookalike's right in front of us. And if we've learned anything about the show, doppelgangers are not the same person. So there should have been a little bit more gravity there.
It should have been. It is weird though, because like Keon looks like Caitlin. She does not really
Mm-hmm.
look like Frost. But they're putting a lot of Mark's grief onto Keon based on Frost's powers in the episode. And I was like, I feel like it would be weirder for Team Flash to be face to face with Caitlin with blue highlights. Like that's just seems to be, but they seem to be fine. We're actually more concerned with our love lives and our home lives than anything else. Just to touch on the Chester and Allegra, I think they kind of got a break this episode. They got to be their version of cute. I say that because I don't like them, but I know the show wants us to see them as cute. Um, and they're fine. It just made I part of me, and I love West Allen. Part of me feels like they were shoehorned in, and I almost wish that they weren't in the episode because it just made me want to go along on their road trip, and we didn't get to do that. And then when we come back and we do the impromptu baby shower, we only get to stay there for like some hugs,
Mm,
and then
yeah.
we're gone. So I was like, I thought the scene was going to be Keon then letting them know they were having twins. That was just going to be another reveal, because it just didn't seem like after everything that the episode had talked about, it didn't mesh with it at all.
Mm. No, I agree completely. It's funny because when Iris showed up and Barry showed up, I was like, oh, look at that style. Iris's hair looked amazing. I was like,
Beautiful.
exactly. I was like, no, don't go. I want to come with you. And that's the reason I loved the premiere the most because when they went off and did all this exciting stuff, we got to go with them.
Mhm.
And now it's back to the same old thing we've been doing since like season five, which is writing them out of an episode. Literally, I'm pretty sure that was it in season four when they went on their honeymoon after, was it before or after Barry got out of jail? they literally had this exact moment with Team Flash. They showed up at the start and then were all happy to go away and then disappeared for the whole episode and then returned at the
Mhm.
end. And once wasn't good. Twice, it's becoming a bit of a crutch now, and I'm pretty sure this is probably the third or fourth time we've done this. But like the episode worked, and to go back to Allegra, Chester, and Cecile, they're nobody's favorite characters, but there is absolutely potential there with them. And I understand why fans of those characters would be frustrated with episodes like this because you get to see that potential in episodes like this, which is the episodes nobody wants to say because they're standalone and filler. So you get to see their potential here. Like Allegra, some beautiful monologues. There was remember when Allegra was introduced with Nash Wells, real depth behind that character,
Mhm.
but she's gotten lumped in with this like quirky Chester storyline, and it's just that's very, very, very much run of the mill. Whereas there was some real depth here. You really got to see that. Same with Cecile. I said I prefer Cecile when she's doing serious storylines and not the comic relief of the situation. You got to see plenty of that here. So why when we get to see these flashes of brilliance here, are we just going to go back to the same quirky old thing and force them into the background? They should be in the background when the leads are on, absolutely. But I think those characters could be handled better so that they don't need these standalone episodes to breathe, that they could maybe just shine throughout the whole of the season, if that makes sense.
It does. I just feel like if we're gonna get filler episodes, I wish it was filler episodes with the leads in so that we could have
Yeah.
them helping steer them. I don't want like my dislike of the episode to overshadow how much the Lady Luck storyline is actually fun. Like it's a fun choice for a filler episode. We haven't seen her in a long while. It
Mhm.
was nice to get an update. And like the mystery around why her good fortune had just completely turned on her was interesting. I don't think that the end part where they explained away why Cecile was messing up without actually explaining why Allegra's powers are messing up, by saying it wasn't actually Lady Luck's bad luck. And I was like, well, we could have just let it be Lady Luck's bad luck. But I guess towards the end of the writing, maybe someone realized they needed to have put dampeners on her, and they didn't. Because
Mhm.
someone had tweeted that, and I was like, I forgot that. They too, they should have put those on her wrists so that she wasn't interfering. But in any case, it's a solid sort of mystery-esque case that works for the Flash. That doesn't feel like they've done something like this in a while. That did highlight how these characters could work in a story. I just wish that it didn't feel like they were getting the leads out the way so that we could
Mhm.
they could play with the OCs. I just didn't. I didn't like that part of it, or the fact that now no one who is a West is actually living in the West house.
Oh yeah, when you put it like that doesn't sound very good at all. I mean, I'm glad Cecile's not on her own. Again, it's a nice extension of the fact that this woman was like, "Yay, my family's leaving me, but I'm going to live alone because I get to be a superhero." I was like, "That no, that doesn't add up for me. These are supposed to be real adults." So I appreciate the fact we finally saw some of that this week, and that Cecile was feeling a little bit lonely, and that's totally understandable. But yeah, I know what you mean. The West House has been such a fixture of the show. I always get happy when we see it on screen because I honestly feel like we don't see it enough. Don't get me wrong, love Barry and Iris's apartment, but there's just a warmliness about the house, the West House, and I feel like we don't see it enough. I'm not really sure we need to see it now that Allegra and Cecile are doing it. But yeah, yeah, I don't like the fact there aren't any West End, and I get your point. But like to go back to the Lady Luck storyline, I'm very happy we saw Becca again. I was watching it, and no everyone knows I hated season four, but I was like, wait, didn't she die? And so I'm glad they explained that away, that Crisis reset that. Not really sure how she would know what Crisis was, because the whole point was that nobody knew what Crisis was, but it was a voiceover, we'll let it slide. Um, but yeah, she's just such a fun character, such a quirky character, and such a likable character, and that's why I
Mm-hmm.
hated the fact they killed her off in season four. So that was nice, and she did, even though she was quirky and lighthearted, it worked well with Cecile's more serious tone. I can't. I do just want to like credit the episode. It did everything it was supposed to. It was a fun little caper. Like I said, this plot would have worked on Murder She Wrote. It would have worked on Arrow. It would have worked on any other shows. I just feel the thing that works against it on The Flash is that it comes in the middle of the final season when it finally felt like we were ramping up stakes, and then suddenly we're just completely stalled. The leads are written out. It's all done in a very formulaic way that makes you think, why now? Why is this happening? And why aren't the leads present for the storyline? I think there is a better way they could handle writing the leads out, because very well aware of the fact that they need a break, they deserve a break. But I'm pretty sure next week's episode, or well, 2 weeks episode from now, will feature Iris and Dreamer at the Supergirl's Dreamer at the center of it, which that to me sounds so much fun. I can't wait for that episode. But it means Barry will probably have a more restrained role or a reserved role in that episode, but he'll still be there at Iris's bedside trying to get her out of the dream sequence that she's fallen into. That's how you give a lead a more restricted role, but keep them relevant in the episode than having to write them out at the start and write them out at the end. And I'm sure we'll have a more Barry-centric episode. We know Oliver Queen's coming back, we know Wally West's coming back, and we know John Diggle's coming back. I think that's part of the interval as well. So I'm sure Iris won't be involved in that episode as much because it'll be a more Barry-centric one. So I just think there is a better way of balancing it than having to automatically write the two of them out at once. I just think that could have been done better. But all in all, this was a very enjoyable episode. I love Becky, and I do like Cecile and Allegra when they have storylines like this. I just wish it wasn't always just had to be focused on them to let them shine like this, so that we can go back and make them the quirky comic relief for the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. This season, and I'm just thinking about this now, feels very like we're doing vignettes, right? Like it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel like a season that has a central big bad or a central plot. We're kind of just trucking along towards the end with the simmering plot of the babies coming. But
Mm-hmm.
everything else, like I wonder, to lower my expectations some more, if this is actually a final season that is going to be full of filler, like great episodes. Like I'm excited for the Iris and Dreamer episode, but it's essentially going to operate like filler. Exciting
Mm-hmm.
filler, but filler nonetheless. So I'm just like, is it a season full of filler? Because if that's the case, then I need to adjust the way that I think about the Flash's final season. I wouldn't like that the Flash's final season is vignettes, but at this point, it is what it is, and they're trying to finish. So, do you think we're getting vignettes, or do you think eventually we're gonna get a story? Though we are in episode 6 already, so they don't have
It
much
is.
story left.
If I think there's 13 episodes this season, and if you divide it by well, you can't divide 13 by 3, but you can divide 12 by 3, and then that's four sets of three sets of four, whatever. My mental math's not good, but the point is the season premiere was a standalone episode. It didn't really tie to anything, but it was a wonderful breath of fresh air. We did 4 Red Death episodes. I'm pretty sure we're going to do 4 interval episodes, and then we're going to do 4 episodes of what the final storyline is. But as from a math standpoint, that makes sense. From a final season storyline standpoint, I don't think it makes as much sense, because you should be building towards something that feels game changing. And how is 4 episodes of a final season storyline going to feel more game changing than, I don't know, the Reverse Flash arc of season 1, which had 22 episodes to build to it? The days of 22 episodes building towards a storyline is gone, but I feel like they could have used these 13 episodes to build towards a single storyline. And I get that making them shorter leaves less need for like plot holes. Like the Cicada storyline in season 5 did not need to be 22 episodes. That was full of plot holes that went on far too long. Same with the Thinker in season 4. But so I get that cutting it down means less room for plot holes, and that's a good thing. But we have 13 episodes here. We could have had a standalone 13 episode season with a big villain. Why not have the Red Death unite the big bads, which is what we think we're going to get in the final season, just or the final few episodes, just without the Red Death. I just think there would have been a better way of tying the two storylines together rather than breaking them up with an interval and making them totally separate. I am definitely on board to see where it goes, but I just feel like for a final season, it shouldn't have operated like any other season, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a weird choice. It just feels like they were handed a lower episode count than they thought they were going to get, and we might have changed direction of how we wanted to do the season. And
Mm-hmm.
instead, we're just going to tell like little vignettes, little short stories that can capture the audience, or it may not capture the audience, but it's what's going to be on screen. I don't like that this is how the Flash is going out, but I want to accept it for what it is. Like I want to, like at the end, like on episode 13, which I probably will still end up bawling anyway, but I want to feel like we came to a satisfying conclusion of the story we've been watching since 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we're going to get that.
Yeah, and I'm totally on board with that. I agree. I agree with you because I want to finish The Flash feeling like all was said and done. There was nowhere else the story could have gone. And let's be honest, if it had gone on for 3 more seasons, they'd have found a way. But I just want to feel completely and utterly fulfilled by the final season. And I think it's going to be hard to do that when you may not even feel completely and utterly fulfilled by the final storyline because it'll only get 4 episodes to breathe. Yeah, there are some final seasons go on too long. Arrow's final season was unusual because it was all centered around Crisis, but that show needed a refresh, and Crisis was the refresh it needed. So we had 10 wonderful standalone episodes that all tied towards an overall arc, but it also made them feel like comic standalone adventures. The Flash has totally missed the point in this, and it's just gone back to the same storyline as usual. So I want to feel fulfilled, and I'm sure the series finale will be a phenomenal episode. I just hope it's the icing on a phenomenal season because we're
Mhm.
struggling at the moment.
We are, and I don't, I have faith that it's going to change. But I feel like we should leave Central City to move to Smallville, and I guess partially Metropolis. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so with Smallville, we find Smallville with Superman and Lois. We finally get to talk about season 3 in a spoilery way. Rewatching it for so to watch it live during its premiere, I fell even more in love with the episode. It talk about breathing well. It just breathes so well for what 45 minutes. They get a lot done in terms of character development while still seeding the plot they're going to be working through in the first half of the season. I just really felt like I was back with the Kents again. I was back with the Cushings. I was like back with the Irons. I just really enjoyed everyone's space in the episode, and then it like hits you in the face with the villain plot, and that's so creepy. Like we went from wholesome and bright to some Bruno Mannheim has someone on an operating table and we're bringing him back to life for reasons unknown. Like,
That's a great introduction because I think it just highlights how much happened in that episode. Like we say, the Superman at Lois is like a streaming quality TV show, and it is. But at the end of the day, it still only has 40 minutes to work with. And like, look at all it managed to pack into those 40 minutes. Um, like where to even begin? First of all, I just want to say I love the like familial tone of this episode. Lois was
mm,
all about how it's bringing people closer, and you totally felt that. I feel like this show balances its ensemble cast so well. And like even from that opening montage where you went from Sam shutting down the mines to Lannis excelling as mayor, to seeing Lois and Clark in their office and then in their bedroom, and it was such a lovely cut, and you got to see so many different aspects of what's going on in Smallville. Sometimes a montage can be used as like a crutch to lean on, as in like just get that out of the way. But I feel like that did such a good job of bridging the gap between 2 and 3 because you really got to see where everybody was. And I love these characters so much, and it was just so nice to just. It's though the reason Superman at Lois works is because it's got that whole like small town vibe. You know everybody, everybody knows everybody. And in those first 5 minutes, it was just like catching up with old friends.
it was, and I feel like even though it was only 27 days, I it felt like there had been enough time between us seeing the season 2 finale and being dropped into the season 3 premiere that you wanted to know what they had been up to, even though it had been less than a month. I just there was a real balance of like the super part of their lives versus the normalcy of everything. Because you have Clark and Jordan like flying across the water and being in the Fortress of Solitude, and then you have Lois trying to hold on to her sanity and her anxiety, helping John drive. Like it's two very important aspects of their children's lives, separate but important, and you get to see how both parents handle it without. I feel like it doesn't. even though I'm invested in where Jordan's superpower journey goes, I also am invested in where Jonathan's life goes as a regular teenager. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
for a show that has supers in it, it doesn't diminish the importance of the storylines going forward for the humans, whether they're involved in crime fighting or not. I'm just like, I want to know if John gets his driver's license, which he did, and how he's doing at school, and how his friend group is. I think it's just as important as Jordan's situation with learning how to be a superhero, which he's not doing well. I will say that.
Oh, chaos, absolute chaos that boy always brings with him. But yeah, no, I have to say it. Clark and Jordan work so well together, but I'm glad we're getting to see more of Lois and Jonathan because they also work very, very well together. And you got to see plenty of that in the premiere episode. And while Jonathan is excelling at being a human, Jordan is not excelling at being a super. And feel like he's always going to get things wrong before he ultimately gets them right. Jordan really came through for the family in the end of season 2 when he was like their only hope in fighting the doppelgangers from the Mirrorverse. But I love that this show does not treat obstacles like just like another like little like trope in the road of storytelling. It feels like real character driven, family driven storylines, and I just feel like we're going to try and it's going to be a family effort to try to get Jordan back up there and turn him into the hero. He's not just going to suddenly come into his powers like you'd see in a random episode of The Flash. It's a journey, and I do appreciate that. Of course, every journey has obstacles, and Jordan is literally being his own obstacle at this point. But like, yeah, his I had it under control scene made me laugh because boy, you did not have that under control. But Clark getting to be all like affirmative and father driven and being like home now. We don't see that side of Clark often. So, but you know how important protecting Jordan and his identity is to him. So you got to see that. And then on the opposite end, you had Lois acting like your father is a terrible driver because she couldn't let go of Jonathan and she wanted him to be such a good driver and she wanted him to be safe more than anything else. Like, in the grand scheme of things, maybe learning to drive isn't on the same level as being a superhero or whatever. This show treats them like equals, and I cannot appreciate that enough. Everything is important to this family dynamic, and you get to see all sides of it. I know Jonathan was a little left out in season 1, I think, but they made up for that in season 2, and I feel like they're going to keep making up for it in season 3. And on that note, can we just talk about how great Michael Bishop is as the new Jonathan?
He is excellent. I think in our spoiler-free review, we were talking about he brings a different energy to John. And I think it's because he's so chill. Like, I think it
Mm-hmm.
just feels like he's really found a balance, right? Like, I really like Michael Bishop's interpretation of Jonathan. I've always felt that Jonathan leans more towards Lois's temperament,
Mm-hmm.
but I really feel that with Michael Bishop's interpretation, he's kind of like, look, this is how things are going. Like, so this is the way that we're operating through. Not to say that he can't have his own little moments, because it was cute when he had told Jordan that maybe you didn't actually have it under control, and
Mm-hmm.
Jordan flipped it on him. It's like, well, maybe you didn't have the car under control. But I love that it is that John seems to feel how it's coming across in the premiere, like he's found his place, like he's not really fighting against feeling like the one left out anymore. He had his friend group and they were having fun at the birthday party, and he just felt like a kid, like that you would want to know, like you'd want
Yeah.
to show up to John and Jordan's birthday and be like, hi John, like if you were 16 and you're like, I got to go.
And I really appreciated that because again, the family story takes the center stage, which it should in a premiere. But at the same time, it feels like Jonathan's finally kind of landed on his feet. They haven't forgotten about everything that happened because you saw Coach Gaines was like, you're going to ruin this job like you ruined my last one because of all the things that went down with the XK last season. They haven't forgot about it, but I do feel like they're ready to move on from it. So we get to see a little bit more of a fun-loving, lively Jonathan going forward, going out with his friends, having fun, just having a damn good time. And I know it's not a spoiler to say he will have more scenes with more people his age in episode 2. And I just feel like that's the way to go because I feel like some of the teens could use a little work, but generally, when all 4 of the teens are together, Sarah, Jordan, Jonathan, and Natalie, you're in for a good time because the show knows how to write for teenagers having a good time. And Yeah, I can't wait to see more of that throughout the season. And I think Michael Bishop, Alex Garfan, and the rest of the cast, not just the teens, by the way, the parents as well, the way they get involved in it, I think all of them will thrive where storylines like that go, because this isn't just a superhero show, it's a family show. And you got to see that so much. And on that note, we got to see a lot, like as far as the adults go as well. I always said this show is like Parenthood meets The Flash, but the premiere leaned more on the Parenthood angle. And I think that's what Superman and Lois does best.
It does. I feel like with the adults, they really got to interact with each other and speak with one another in ways that were both funny and serious. Like I enjoyed Clark and Lois's segments. I like that they
Mhm.
are like they're happy together. They're putting Taro's properties to use
They are
together.
very much so.
But they're also, very invested in their boys' lives. So they're taking time
Mhm.
for each other, but they're taking also time to be with their kids and to be with their friends. I think it's so cute that like Lana was like, y'all are doing good. And like Clark is like glowing and Lois is smug about it. And they're weighing in on the potential like Kent baby. I know that at the end of the episode they yanked that from us, but the joy that they were sitting in at the possibility of having another child, and Clark trying to come to terms with his feelings on it, and Lois basically beaming at the idea, and that John and Lana got to talk about it with them. Like it was nice for them to be able to lean on other adults in their lives to have a conversation about their feelings.
Definitely. And they were two of my favorite scenes from the episode. I just have to say that Clark and Lana have such good best friend chemistry, and we've known that from the start. But also, Lois and Lana have such good best friend chemistry, and I think that's an important part of the show because that relationship was not established in the first season. They had to build towards it, they had to work towards it, and it's just the two scenes with the Lana scene with Clark and the Lana scene with Lois, both of them relatively back to back. It was just so joyous seeing Lana get to go, Clark Kent, when he said how good things were with Lois, but at the same time, Lois and Lana talking about the baby and the little bits he added and the little like ad libs, the little chemistry, the little conversations, the dialogue, it all serves that so well. Lana is such a good best friend. And one thing I'm really looking forward to this season is that she's in the loop because they did such a good job keeping her with the more realistic, standalone, family driven storylines. And I hope we get to see plenty of that this season. But she's now in the super loop. And I think they'll be relying on her more and leaning on her more. And that she might be involved in the main story more. And I think that's a good thing because I I love seeing Lana get involved, and she's always at the heart of some family drama. So the fact that she might now get to be the best friend or the crutch that people lean on when they need a friendly voice to chat to, love that for her, and I can't wait to see more of those scenes.
Well, and it's also nice that they get to be like they make powers a little mundane sometimes. Like the moment when Clark like walks up and he tells her the mold has actually spread through the entire wall because he
Yeah.
just uses his vision. I appreciate that so much about Superman and Lois because he would use his powers every day, like he like
Yeah.
for super things and for just mundane things. So it was just nice. Like she didn't even have to hire a contractor to tear out the whole wall. Like don't even bother. It's the whole like just start the process to find the money. I just think that those little bits, those little pieces of their everyday lives, it's just so nice to see. Or even like with Lana trying to do a good job as mayor, but also dealing with her impending divorce and the emotional quality of her, yes, being busy, but also probably not really wanting to end her marriage. Not because she doesn't think that it's time to move on to the next path, but because it's something sad and like it's an acknowledgement of the end. And again, some fun is with Kyle too. Like Kyle and Chrissy, no one would have saw that coming at
Mm-mm.
all.
No, I love it when characters that never interacted with one another suddenly start interacting with one another. Of course, it makes it a little bit, wait a minute, why are you two sharing a scene together? You can maybe see that coming. But like at the end of the day, when you've such an ensemble cast and parts of the storyline are set about super beings and parts of the storylines are set about town halls, two completely different ends of the spectrum, not everyone's going to interact. So we're now 3 seasons in and we're starting to see some new dynamics between people. And I can confirm that you might see some other ones in future episodes. So I just wanted to say that I think that that is such a refreshing small town soap. I don't mean soapy as a bad thing, but it's something you would see in soaps. They just so not everyone's going to interact or be best friends at the start, but certain things will happen, lead certain people into each other's lives, and that's such a realistic thing. So even though I'm not like champion Kyle and Chrissy, so authentic, so realistic, completely appreciated that they took time to tell a story like that. No idea where it's going to go, but it was so unforeseen and so different. And I think they both kind of needed each other at that time because they needed a distraction. I'm not really sure Chrissy's awkward teenage interactions with
No.
Jonathan and Jordan's it really equates to the stuff that Kyle's going through with his marriage. But you know what? They needed a good time and they needed distraction and they found each other. I don't know how permanently they found each other, but like it worked in the moment. But also on that note, can we go back to Chrissy's interaction with the teenagers? Because that was kind of what?
It was so unfortunate. As I know that it's supposed to be a comedic beat. I wouldn't necessarily say that it landed well. I just feel
Hmm.
like the Chrissy we know is awkward. I don't know if she'd be that awkward in front of 16-year-olds. Like
Hmm.
did we have a flashback to our own high school days or something? Like what happened? Like that we would just completely lose it in front of some minors. Like there are of course adults that should just never be around teenagers because they can't help but try to be down or hip because they want to relate. And I just felt like that wasn't Chrissy. I felt like Chrissy would just awkwardly be like, I got you an alarm clock and then hand it to
Yeah.
him.
Yeah, I know the scene lingered for far too long, but I know that was intentional. It was supposed to make us feel awkward, and it did. But I was like, "What is the purpose of this?" I, Chrissy did say a nice line, which is that the biggest event on her social calendar is a teenage birthday party. So I feel like we could be going somewhere with that, and that she's trying to get out more. And I don't know whether Kyle will be involved in that. But again, if that's the purpose, I do admire that because again, it's a very what people might call mundane storyline in a super show. But Superman and Lois doesn't care. It makes time for the mundane, it makes time for the realistic, and that's where it thrives. Um, it's still a very unusual scene, but generally I can appreciate where the storyline's going. And on the Kyle note, he's made mistakes. He did a horrible thing, and he's been adequately punished for it. And of his marriage is now ended. But I honestly wouldn't be surprised if him and Lana find their way back to each other because the show has done such a good job of like portraying them as they are each other's soulmates, kind of, even though real life happens and sometimes soulmates don't always end up together. It's just they have an understanding of each other that nobody else will ever have of each other persons. So I wouldn't be surprised if they find their way back to each other in the future. But I feel like the show is very much enjoying itself in the present now and knows that they are the past, they might be the future again, but they aren't the present. So let's have a little bit of fun with that and start some more realistic storylines. And as you see, Lana's struggling to juggle everything, and then Kyle's still really hurt by the way things panned out, and he's guilty over what he'd done. So I do think there's some scope there for great storylines, and I hope we get to see them going forward.
I think so too, because Lana's issue, besides the cheating, was how much she had shrunk herself to make
Yeah.
room for Kyle. And his drinking was out of hand, and his depression was a lot because of the Smallville wasn't going anywhere, the town was drying up, and he did not react to it well. He's in a healthier place now. So perhaps as he grows, they might be able to find their way back. I'm okay either way.
Hmm.
I'm really invested in Lana's mayor journey, and
Yeah.
potentially if she's going to date anybody else, perhaps Tal will come back in another season. This is just to confirm it for people. Todd Helbing did say that Tyrell would not be in this season, so sorry guys, but he might like if they get an additional season, I could see them maybe toying with a relationship between him and Lana just based on the Bizarre World thing. But
Hmm.
who knows? I just think I really enjoyed that with the mundanity of everything. We do get super stuff too. It's like a mixture of things. There's a lot happening at the barbecue birthday. Like you have fun happening, you have awkwardness happening, and then you have John taking Sam to task for getting Natalie's hopes up because she misses her grandfather desperately. And she's aware that's not her grandfather, but she thought maybe she'd be able to have a relationship with his doppelganger of some kind. And all Sam cared about was getting her genius level skills with the DoD. And John was like, she is a child. She's a teenager who needs to be around other teenagers, not your eggheads. And you should not be using her. She wants to get to know you. And I like that Sam took that. note.
Mhm.
It was a very fiery note, and I was very there for that energy. And he corrected his behavior. And I think sometimes it's easier for Sam to do that with kids than it is for
Mhm.
him to do that with adults. But I appreciated that he was taken to task and then he fixed the situation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to say, I adore the Superman at Lois version of Sam Lane, because the Sam Lane we saw in the comics and the Sam Lane we've seen in the likes of Smallville and the one in Supergirl was complete and utter trash. I am sorry. Oh, what a horrible person. But this Sam Lane is not trash. He absolutely does the wrong thing on so many occasions. But even though he's kind of pig-headed and stubborn, he will learn from his mistakes and try to do better. And that is a far more well-rounded character. I don't think Sam Lane always means harm, at least this version. He doesn't always mean harm, but he's aware of the fact that he can cause it. And I thought that scene with him and Natalie at the end, where he admitted that he's not good with people in general, let alone kids or whatever, and he always says the wrong thing. Beautiful, beautiful scene. And the way Natalie started smiling endearingly at him, I felt myself doing the same thing, because you don't see Sam get to be that like open as much, with the exception of Lois, who he was always open with. I just feel like I ever since he moved out of the DOD, I think he's moved back into it now, apparently. But ever since he moved out of the DOD, we really get to see Sam Lane flourish as a character. And I cannot wait. I hope this relationship he has with Natalie produces so many more meaningful moments, because that's another one of those new dynamics we talked about. And it was so beautiful.
It was, and there's just so much potential for growth for everybody, which is why I am for the decision of breaking up Jordan and Sarah, even though it's hilarious that they only made it 27 days. But I think if they can just, let them be broken up and fingers crossed go their separate ways, that they too will grow as characters. I absolutely hated their scenes in the premieres. I appreciated that Sarah set boundaries. What I didn't appreciate was how she treated Jordan. That diner scene where he got her an elephant from Malaysia and she just did not want it was just like, girlfriends do that though. Like he heard something, he went to go stop it. He got you an elephant on the way. Why can't we have the elephant? It wasn't a token of love. It might be a token of affection, but like it can still be platonic affection.
Right, right. I told you and Reed last week, if I had superpowers, I'd buy you a toy elephant. I just like I don't understand why she was reading into this. And I know with Jordan you can read into things because he feels things very deeply. But I just want to say I championed the Jordan and Sarah romance so much in season one. It was refreshing, it was sweet, it was charming, it was heartfelt. But then season two kind of tainted that. And I understand everyone goes through a rough patch, but I feel like season three is now going to jump on the season two part of it instead of the season one part of it. And the longer it drags on, the less and less charming it gets. And all you can do is feel for both of them. I'm not going to shed anyone. All you can do is feel for both of them because they're teenagers. They don't know what they're going through right now. But I agree with your point. I feel like Sarah is asking Jordan to respect her wishes, but it was only in this episode she actually vocalized what those wishes really were. And after last season, when she kind of like dragged him through the mud because she felt guilty over what she did, it's not really fair to expect him to get things right away unless you're upfront and tell someone how you feel. And I feel like Sarah has not been doing that. Maybe she did do that sometime in the 27-day window. But the thing is, the show only showed us her doing it now in the scene at the birthday party, which the timing might have been off, but I mean, at least she was upfront. She wasn't really being honest about she wasn't really being clear about what she wanted at the diner scene, and she certainly wasn't being clear about what she wanted in the previous season. So nobody is harder on Jordan than us today, but I think all of us can say that she really you feel for him because he doesn't know how to act after the way things blew up last season. And I fear that she might start doing the same thing again, unbeknownst to herself. I don't think Sarah's being malice at all. There's nothing mean about her, but I do think that she can sometimes forget that the reason they connected was because they were both gentle souls going through something similar. And I think sometimes she forgets that he still is that, and that she needs to be more upfront with what their relationship is without hurting his feelings. Because there is of course, he's going to be hurt that they can't be together, but I feel like she's unnecessarily sharp with him sometimes. She's unnecessarily harsh on him sometimes. We saw that last season when she said, he doesn't understand what I'm going through, when actually the reason they connected was because he did. Um, yeah, I just think sometimes she overlooks the depth of Jordan, which is a shame because that's how they connected in the first place.
Yeah, like as a trio, we've discussed how it just seems like she doesn't realize he can't really be her friend right now. Like
Hmm.
it has only been 27 days, and he's always been more invested in their relationship romantically than she has. Not to say that Sarah doesn't love him, but I think he has thrown himself into their relationship to the point where it is hard for Jordan to untangle his romantic feelings for Sarah and his friendly ones, his platonic feelings. But it also could be like, if you were to take romance out of it, I think maybe Sarah's forgotten she's his only friend. So like,
Mm.
yes, he has his brother. They didn't really show him and Natalie being friends. I think they're just more so friendly. So
Hmm.
he doesn't have anybody else. So of course, and it's not just the powers thing. It's not just that she's the only person who knows about his powers, and he wants to be able to talk to somebody outside of his parents and his brother and Natalie. Um, it's that you are the only person that he talks to. He doesn't have anybody else. And perhaps he'll go on a friendship journey this season.
That would be lovely. And like I said, I think those four teens thrive when they're together. So maybe we will see different dynamics. Like Jonathan and Sarah have a nice friendship, but we could also maybe see the other end of that and see Jordan get to know Natalie a little bit better, because Natalie kind of connected with Sarah and Jonathan, but never really had any scenes with Jordan unless they were doing super things. And on the super note, we could end up seeing the two of them do super things again this season. So maybe that's what they'll connect over. That would be quite nice. But I feel like maybe now is a good time to like pivot into the super territory of the storyline of
Mm-hmm.
Superman at Lois, because first of all, those action set pieces in that scene where Superman fought Adam Man, cinematic, big budget. Loved every moment of it. And I like the fact it didn't overwhelm the episode. Again, very family driven episode. But seeing Adam Man back was wonderful. Seeing Clark get to fly through the skies of Metropolis like your traditional Superman story, wonderful. And the music when we saw the suicide slum sign, they're very much treating Bruno Mannheim like a threat that should not be trifled with. And I appreciate that, because at the end of the day, it looks like he's human. So it takes a lot for a show to kind of present a threat like this, but great job so far. I have no idea where the storyline's going, but yeah, Bruno Mannheim, not a threat to be trifled with.
He isn't. I like that we're seeing a different part of Metropolis
Hmm.
for this story. When we saw it in season one and some of it in season two, it is all very bright and lovely. Like, yes, murders happen, but we typically are seeing the glass storefronts and the people going about their business. It doesn't really look dirty and forgotten.
Hmm.
But when um Clark is fighting Adam Man and we crash land into South Metropolis, it's not the Metropolis we're used to seeing. And I
Hmm.
think that is something this season is going to have fans confront. It was very much given, this is definitely the side of the city that no one cares about. Like, I mean, if you didn't notice by the dirt and grime everywhere, the suicide slums was very clear that this is a forgotten place. And I would assume that Bruno Mannheim is attached to this area in some fashion. And there are going to be very tough talks about who Superman takes care of and
Yeah.
who's a hero. Like, yes, he's great and he's bold and he's wonderful, but that means nothing to some of these people that live in this area. And it's not just because, crime happens every day. It's because, like, great to have Superman, but can we have some assistance?
Yeah.
Can we get some funds for this area? So I do want to know what Bruno Mannheim's agenda is going to be. Currently, it is reviving the dead for purposes unknown. And he's very creepily like logical. Like I felt very uncomfortable when he was like, shoot him up again.
Hmm.
Like when he
Yeah.
was like, then the person working was like, I don't know if it'll work. He's like, do it again.
He was not exerting himself in that speech. He was reserved, he was composed, and it was very intimidating. And I just have
Mhm.
to credit Chad L. Coleman, an exceptional introduction as the character. You know, within a couple of seconds that you follow his lead. You do not talk against him, and you do exactly what he needs you to do. And another interesting dynamic is the debut of Onomatopoeia, who is a
Mhm.
Green Arrow villain in the comics, who usually works with non-superpowered vigilantes or works against them. He's a serial killer who tries to kill them. But in this version of the story, their powers work on Superman. So what does that mean? What is Onomatopoeia? Are they an alien? Are they a metahuman? I do not know. But either way, it looks like Bruno Mannheim is using this entity to his own needs, whatever that be. And I think that automatically makes them an incredibly frightening duo because, like, incredible stage presence from Chad L. Coleman as Bruno Mannheim, but also there was an uncomfortableness when Clark came across Onomatopoeia for the first time and they were just standing there and then look around and they were gone. Also, just want to credit that city scene where Clark went up, it was looking down. Cinematic. We love this in
Mhm.
Superman at Lois, but it was very effective in highlighting that this is a purring not to be taken, or that it needs to be taken very seriously. Um, yeah, I don't. I think the thing I like the most about this is I have no idea where it's going. I like you said, it made you feel very uncomfortable very, very quickly. And for a show about superpowers and families to be able to do that so effectively in such a short amount of time is a testament to it. But what a pairing they could end up being.
It could be. And I like that it makes you want to watch episode two
Hmm.
to find out what happens. They did not give us anything, but the two villains working together and how effective that is, especially because at the beginning of the episode, Clark and Lois are already talking about Bruno. Like,
Hmm.
so it's like, oh, we're setting it up for the investigative part too. Like it's gonna be a super powered issue and a journalistic issue. And I like that the premiere gives you two things to worry about. It gives you the villains to worry about, but it also gives you the mystery behind whatever's going on with Lois because she's not pregnant.
Hmm.
So, and she's I guess potentially sick. And it would be like, who do I have to fight? Because
Yeah.
obviously it's called Superman and Lois, so we will not lose her. But I don't hurt me either as we go through the story.
Yeah, I mean, if Reed was here right now, we'd quote Katy Perry and say that was a fallen from Cloud 9 moment
Yes.
because we were on such a high. The family were so ready for this exciting new adventure, and in one moment we found out that they're not going to have it. I felt so bad for Clark and Lois and those quiet looks they exchanged when they found out that she wasn't pregnant. But then that kind of disappointment turned into almost a fear because Lois was kept on the phone and she was like, "Well, okay, if I'm not pregnant, what is wrong?" And so that was a really like worrying and like down to earth kind of moment. And then the fact that that set up beautifully, then the Bruno Mannheim tease, and we don't know what he's doing. I feel like the finale was, I'm sorry, the premiere had such like almost like a finale teaser to it. It's
Hmm.
it it set up everything that's coming next, and all of it carries stakes in such a short amount of time. You have what's going on with Lois, but you also have what Bruno Mannheim up to, and I feel like now looking back on it, the premiere kind of teased that right from the very beginning. We just didn't know it at the end. They took us on a journey to get us there, and like what a journey it was. And if the rest of the season's anything like that, I think we Superman and Lois could be set to hit new highs.
Well, I love then that like we were like gushing about Walker Independence, and that is done. And so now we have Superman and Lois to reclaim the crown. Because we're always gushing about Superman and Lois, but I mean you can't help it because the writing is so excellent. And by the way, Michael, I realized we front loaded with DC TV because we're about to move into Gotham Knights. Whenever it's just the two of us, it's like DC Central.
Nancy Ho, joking, joking.
Joking, we love
But
Nancy.
we love Nancy. But it's I mean like I am taking this moment in and I'm living in this moment because we don't know how much longer DCTV is going to be on this network. So if we can spend a good old hour talking about DCTV, you can bet I'm going to take that. And I feel like that's a good segue to jump right into Gotham Knights.
Right. So what's interesting, I think, about Tuesdays is they're marketing it as Super Night. So we have Superman and Lois, and then we have Gotham Knights, and we're going from like wholesome but very like gritty when it comes to the action, when it comes to Superman and Lois, and then with Gotham Knights, it's like, oh no, there is no wholesome.
Yeah.
It's Gotham.
They're like, we got no time for that. Um, and it's interesting watching Gotham Knights back now and seeing the response to it because we kind of had a this is better than I would expecting it to be kind of consensus. And it feels like the audience has kind of felt the same way. So happy for Gotham Knights. And it also performed very well in the ratings. So things are going its way for now. And I'm happy about that. But it's an interesting pilot episode now, especially having this is my third time watching it, especially watching it when you know when the beats are coming. Because like even before I watched the first episode, I felt like I knew it because every CW show has that trailer that literally is just the pilot in 5 minutes.
Mhm.
And so technically I've seen the pilot 4 times. Um, but it's interesting. I feel like it's such a familiar story, and looking back on it now, I think the show has even more potential. I just think the pilot had to go through the motions to get there, and I'm more excited to see where the story goes next now that we've done that. But I keep saying interesting. I cannot put my finger on why I find it so interesting. There are some wonderful moments in there. There are some great storylines in there, but I'm almost happy it's done so we can move on to the rest of the show now. But generally, I still just want to say that I think this show has so much potential, and I really enjoyed the pilot a lot more than I thought I would.
That has been the reaction for a lot of people, who, which is good. I mean, it's nice to see folks who were on the fence about it give it a chance and actually come out watching it, wanting to see more. I think a lot of it has to do with how in your face the pilot gets once it actually gets rolling. I mean, it is very brutal.
Hmm.
It is, and so you do have like quippy moments between the teams, but then you also have the horror of Bruce's murder. Like it's not just that he was killed; this man was thrown from a building, and
Hmm.
like the like it's just, and he has the mask half on his face, like there's blood everywhere on the sidewalk, um, and the idea that someone would frame teenagers and not just some scrappy kids who are trying to make it on the streets, like also his adoptive son. Like they someone truly planned this to the T, and it is just, I think the potential is in the mystery around why someone do this and why they would choose these kids.
Mm. Yeah, it's the perfect setup. But I do have to say, I don't think the GCPD is very bright. This is why they
No.
needed Batman in the first place, because ain't no way the Batman is getting killed by a bunch of teenagers, regardless of who their parents are. But I mean, like, credit to the Court of Owls, and we will get into them, but credit to the Court of Owls for concocting the perfect setup because we get to learn so much about the kids quite quickly, and all of them are so different because you have like the Joker's daughter and Duella, then you have Harper and Cullen Rowe, who are comic book characters, even if they're not as famous of comic book characters. And then you, of course, you have Bruce Wayne's adopted son, Turner, who's more of an original character. He is an original character, and I know some people weren't happy that when you have an ensemble full of comic book characters, your lead is an OC. I have issues with that after my Arrow days have scarred me. But I think it works. I think it works quite well. And the setup that we were first met Carrie Kelly in the opening, and then we didn't really see her much again, other than when she left the rose on Batman's casket. We then meet her again at the end, and we find out that she was actually Robin. Such a unique interpretation, but I know we were most excited about Carrie Kelly coming into the show, and I think she could be the most interesting character of them all. She's fun, she's quirky, and that's everything a Robin should be. She doesn't have the yellow and red outfit, so we're going in a completely different tone here. Gotham Knights doesn't do color; it's completely like dark and grim, but like I feel like this could work. I'm interested to see where this goes. It's a very original Elseworld story, and if you can take the canon out of it, I think you'll enjoy the show a lot more. Um, I like Turner. I don't think he had an awful lot to work with in the first episode because we jumped over all the grief. Again, the pilot just kind of went through the motions. But now that that's out of the way, I think it could be an interesting dynamic because he has all these like cartoonish characters around him. Carrie Kelly, who he might like, Stephanie, who he might like helping him on the bat computer, and then him, a very like uh prim and proper kind of student who likes life as it was and doesn't know how to deal with all this dark and gritty crime fighting stuff. I think what you've got there is a genius concept. I just don't think the pilot got the time to tell that story. So I think going forward, we really could have some amazing episodes if the show lives up to its potential.
Yeah, I think so, especially because when you take into context Turner's life, like there's a really great moment when he uses his one phone call to call Stephanie and he
Hmm.
asks for her help. And he says, you know, that they are friends because she's the one who recognized that in order to be adopted by Bruce, both of his parents had to die. And so now where he's in a situation in which he's lost another parent and he's an orphan yet again. So I think that'll be interesting how they play with that, especially juxtaposed to the kids he's running with. Because the Rose siblings, their father is absolutely horrible. And
Hmm.
they needed to get out of that household. And then you have Duella, who grew up in Arkham Asylum, who is very aware of how things went down between her parents. So she's messed up. Like, so the it's just it would be, I want to know, and I had said I wasn't going to continue watching, but we'll see if I end up on episode 2 after all. But I want to know when they actually have time to sit down, whether or not the other kids are going to pick at Turner's complicated feelings about being adopted, because they, in their minds, you got adopted by the richest man in a lot of places. Actually, it's not just Gotham. So, and to have a problem with that, they would be like, what's your issue? You know, like
Hmm.
you were taken care of, you were dropped at the best of schools, presumably, though it's not quite clear Bruce was around.
Mm.
So he had guardianship and they had nothing. So I do want to see how that dynamic works when we're talking about kids who have rough upbringings versus a kid who had a tragic beginning, but some would say won the lottery by being
Hmm.
selected by Bruce.
It's very interesting because at the end of the day, on paper, Turner did have a life of comfort, but he was adopted into that life of comfort after suffering the worst tragedy of all. So you know that should not be downplayed. But at the end of the day, a lot of people who didn't live that life of comfort would understandably be like, no, you had the best life you could ever hope for. But like Turner said on the phone to Stephanie, in order to gain a new parent, he had to lose two before that. So you can't, of course, you can completely understand where he's coming from. And I thought it was very effective in the start when he said he thought his father was coming to, it was in his fencing competition. He thought he was going to
Mm-hmm.
be there. And Stephanie said he probably had to work late. That was a double entendre because it could have meant two things. One, Bruce was a deadbeat dad who never showed up to things and always had to work late. Or two, Batman's busy. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But it was the third one that no one saw coming. Bruce and Batman are dead. So that was a very effective introduction. We knew there was more to that story with that one line of dialogue. And then in the phone call between Turner and Stephanie, you find that out a lot more. Um, I think Stephanie and Turner's relationship could be the most interesting thing about Turner because that's where he can be himself with.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope we get to see more of that. But also, he really seems to get on with Carrie Kelly. So, and she knows a side of Bruce and Batman that he didn't. So that could be great as well. I think there's so much potential. But I will say one of the dynamics I'm looking most forward to is his kind of like unusual kinship with Duella. They're
Yeah.
so opposite. One being Batman's son, one being the Joker's daughter, and her being so like slightly unhinged, but she has a plan, and Turner being a lot more hinged, but he doesn't have a plan. So the two of them are completely like two sides of the same coin. And I really, really like that kind of unusual spark between them. She was like, "You almost got us killed." And he was like, "You're right, I'm sorry." But then she like hits him and was like, "Apology accepted." I really like that. So I hope we get to see more of that going forward. I think there's so much potential with Turner. I just think because the pilot had to go through the motions, we never really got to see any of it. And I hope we get to see it going forward. I keep saying going forward because Gotham Knights as a show excites me a lot more than the pilot actually did,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I think it's because the pilots have to do a lot of work. I think that
Hmm.
is why for some shows you do actually have to watch past the pilot. That there are some incredible pilots out there. I think Gotham Knights was decent. They had a lot of
Hmm.
legwork to do, and it really isn't until towards the end of the episode that you really get to see where the show could go. The group of kids seem like they're going to be the best part
Yeah.
of what the show is, and of course they should be because it is an ensemble cast and they are the leads. But I wish that the Harvey Dent stuff was better. I'm not quite convinced with Misha Collins' interpretation of Harvey Dent just yet. He just seems like a suit, right? A suit with nice coats. It's just nothing there yet that's giving me what I wanted. Like he's not. I always feel like the first face. of Harvey Dent before he becomes the villain. He's supposed to be a politician that you believe in.
Hmm.
Like, well, in this case, he's the DA, but you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, totally.
And he's just, he didn't give that to me. I didn't feel reassured by him. I didn't feel like he commands the attention that you would think his character would, or the authority of it.
Hmm.
He did come off in that one moment where I believe that's Cullen, where he dismisses the detective because the detective is being transphobic, and
Hmm.
Harvey's not going to let that stand. So I like that the compassionate side was there. Same with when he was trying to say, "Why would Turner kill his father?" Like, I'm basically that kid's uncle. He would not do this.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if you've seen The Dark Knight, you know how much the slogan "We believe in Harvey Dent" carries in Gotham. It's an important thing, and we as viewers have to believe in Harvey Dent. And I do feel that, like, when he was on screen with Turner, we got that, and when he was standing up for Colin, we got that as well. But again, I think that going through the motions of the pilot kind of worked against him in the end, because Batman the Animated Series did a good thing where Two-Face or Harvey had a darkness within, and it was only when he got like burnt and the accident happened that the other face came out, that other personality could thrive. So he was struggling with two personalities. I think that's what Gotham Knights is going for, but they kind of got there in a very basic kind of way that undid all the character work they did with Harvey Dent, because
Mhm.
suddenly one shady politician woman was able to make him turn his back on his entire family. And I didn't like that. I think in hindsight, the promo for what's coming up in the season makes it stand up better, because we do see that shot of Harvey smashing the mirror and half of the mirror is all distorted, showing that Two-Face is coming, but he's already in here mentally. And I
Mhm.
think if we'd gotten a bit more of that in the pilot, it would have held up better. But right now, it made him look a bit one-dimensional, and then he turned his back on his family just so that he could become the mayor. It works if you know the story, but the whole point of a pilot is that you don't know the story going in. So I feel like it kind of let him down from that front. I don't get that we believe in Harvey Dent. I do get that he's a good person on one side and then he's struggling with his demons, but I have decades of comic book knowledge to back that up. I don't know if the average viewer would. So I agree. I don't know if we needed the whole Harvey heel turn this quickly. But again, I assume that woman whispering sweet nothings in his ear is part of the Court of Owls and that they're pulling the strings. It makes sense from that standpoint, but I still think Harvey Dent is a stronger judge of character and should have taken a little bit more before he swung on the opposite "we're going to hunt these kids down" direction.
Yeah, I want them to twist his arm more. Like, I want it
Hmm.
to be like a difficult turn. And we just did not get that in the pilot. But the thing about sophomore episode, like the second episode, is we do tend to slow down. So perhaps that
Hmm.
is what we will sort of recalibrate that interaction for Harvey in episode two. But I think, how did you feel about the Court of Owls reveal? Because I thought it was one of the best parts of the pilot. I feel like they landed, like they stuck their landing about making it creepy. I
Hmm.
felt very uncomfortable, and even if you have like a basic knowledge of what could happen to these kids, it's just like, oh, maybe put the coin back. Put it back, and don't look you any further into this.
I watched this episode about a month or two before it aired, and I'm kind of annoyed that I accidentally watched a trailer for the episode right before I did it, because it spoiled the Court of Owls reveal. I have to say, if you didn't know going in, that was an excellent reveal. It built up to it nicely. And you thought that, was it Cullen who swiped the watch, was just like, here's a souvenir, and then you saw the owl on it. They were building up to it really, really well. And the fact that someone as unhinged as the Joker's daughter, like Duella, suddenly became serious and like the most logical of the group, it was like, we can't do this any further. They should have just killed us. That was very effective, because Duella doesn't fear anything. She had a gun pointed in front of her and didn't care. Whereas now, suddenly, she's completely fearful of what the Court of Owls are capable of. Excellent reveal. Also, I'm not a graphic person, so I don't think I didn't love the ending, but the whole point is it was very effective, and I think that was the whole point, was that we weren't supposed to love it. It ended very abruptly, just like that poor man's life. But
Mhm.
so, like, I think it was the Court of Owls, again, to use what I said about Superman and Lois and Bruno Mannheim, is not to be trifled with. And these kids have found themselves in the crosshairs through no fault of their own. All they are doing is trying to survive, and they have become the biggest thorn in the Court of Owls side since Batman. And we know how that turned out for Batman. So how do these kids survive? I do think that was a very effective build-up, and I think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with throughout the season. And the Court of Owls is adapted on TV quite a bit. I think Gotham did them as well, but we never actually get to see them in like the movies or the animated shows. So they're still very much untouched in that sense. So I can't wait to see what Gotham Knights does with them, because they're still relatively new villains to the overall mainstream Batman audience. I'm sure comic book villains are more familiar with them, but I mean, they've such a scope here to work with. They can do whatever they've liked. They've already committed the biggest sin in Batman stories, which is killing off Batman. So I mean, like, we have a clean slate here. The Court of Owls, I think, could be an incredible villain for this season, and I'm glad they've opted for a non-mainstream famous one, while also telling the origins of Two-Face, which is a more mainstream famous one. So Gotham Knights has a lot to work with, and I'm just going to keep harping on about how excited I am about where the story could go.
And you're not alone. Like, again, to reiterate that people are just really, I appreciate that people have decided to give it a chance.
Me too.
And it's actually made me want to watch episode 2. I think, I mean, between our like spoiler-free review that we did and then seeing the response from people who are casual, like Batman fans, to people who actually really partake in a lot of Batman stories, that there is a middle ground where everyone's like, you know what, let's have some fun. Like, I think that that's really good for this show, and I think that if it's given more time, I'm hopefully not 6 episodes worth of time. Like, it really shouldn't be like the middle of the season that it picks up, but it could be a fun ride, and I don't think I want to miss out on it.
I'm glad you said that, and I agree. You know how critical I was off the first trailer, but I have to say every other trailer that shows some of what's coming up in the season looks like so much fun. And I think as this team of teenagers gets together and actually establishes themselves as the Gotham Knights, it'll get a lot more fun, because Gotham Knights is what this show is all about. It's literally in the title. So I think as when they become the Gotham Knights and start doing like standalone adventures while also trying to clear their name, I think that's when the show will find its footing, and I hope it does it quickly, because like I said, great concept, and I hope the execution of it lives up to that.
Fingers crossed.
Manifesting it.
Yes, manifesting. But to leave Gotham, to move to, I wouldn't, Horseshoe Bay is brighter, it's but still just as dark, like as far as what's going on in the plot. I think that this whole people missing their hearts story is gonna stretch for a good portion of the season. I'm interested in this choice that they've decided to do with that. I think moving away from Case of the Week makes sense for a 13 episode season. That they would want to focus on a longer arc. But I also like that because we're setting all of this up, we get Nancy actually having to work within the boundaries of what the police are doing, which is not
Yeah.
something she's used to doing at all.
I always said Nancy Drew is a bit like a superhero show, because she's basically like a bit like a vigilante, and that she goes off and does her own thing. But this season, you're starting to see all the paperwork that's involved in that, the prevention that's involved in that, the like strings that are attached to it. And I think now she's starting to realize that as well, especially now that she's got a job in law enforcement. I There's so much to talk about here, but also on that same point of Horseshoe Bay being quite dark, it is unusual. Mentioned this last week. The lighting is dull, like it's always been, even though the sun is shining. This show is very much like a dark kind of tone with a dark kind of hue. But this season's getting a bit more whimsical, and I kind of like that about it. Like when Nancy was trying to set up the trash can to break into the house, and then Bess was looking for the candle at the same time, and she's like, "Can't really talk right now." There's they're going out of their way they're trying something different, and I really appreciate that. And I think it's because Nancy's like I don't want to say like her self-deprecation and the debt she had against herself, that's not playing into the storyline as much as she kind of got over that last season. So it's giving them more room to work with what's going on around them. And with this, like you said, this serial killer story is stretching on beyond just 13 episodes. And the fact now that it's not just a serial killer that started up, it could actually be the Frozen Hearts killer who is active, was it in Alaska beforehand? Um,
Yes.
I feel like there's like mythology that took place before the season even began, and they're going to build up to that. So this is a threat again that needs to be taken seriously, and we've got the right person involved, like Nancy Drew. But between that and her dynamic with Agent Park and the police department, there's a lot going on in the season, and I really like
There is, and I am once again living off of Nancy and Agent Park
it.
content. I
Yes.
really do enjoy him as a character, and I think his brain is so weird. And I think it's very like he's still charming, but very brass tacks, right? Like so even
Hmm.
when they're interacting in the office and she wants to do more, and he's like, there is a serial killer who is targeting you. And while I do appreciate all that you can bring to the case, I'd rather you do that here with the files that I've given you. Like
Hmm.
I'm just like, tell her. I mean, she's not gonna listen, but like I think we should at least say it. But I also like how much he loves her brain. And he
Hmm.
does not like even though she did mess up, and then she could have were those nails? She could have died
Yeah.
through a volley of nails. He did not like yell at her. He did not like diminish her contributions. He just said these things happen. Like you made a choice, it wasn't the right choice. Now we just deal with what moving forward. And she's not used to that.
Mm-mm.
She's used
No.
to law enforcement telling her that she should not be here, and he's not telling her that. He's just saying, be cognizant of how much this affects you. And I love the romantic suspense moment. I was like, it's like being in an action movie where there's romance, because like he barges into the house when she stepped on the plate, and he I will say her sneezing was not the way to go about getting him to launch across the room, but I'll take it, whatever we had to do. But his like dash across the room, flip at the table, spin her around, and they hit the floor before everything goes off. I was like, this is the content that I deserve. It's the
Yes.
content that I love. And the fact that she has to save him next and she's like, is it, are we done? And he tries to peep up, and then she's to bring him back down because another volley comes. I'm just
Yeah.
excellent action sequence. Excellent.
It was. And you mentioned the dynamic between the two of them last season or last week, and I wasn't completely sold in the season premiere. I liked it, but I was like, where are we going with this? Because there was kind of the similar kind of tension that she had with Tamura, but that
Mhm.
was very much an episodic thing. Whereas I'm like, are we building this up to something? Now in this episode, I am sold hook, line, and sinker
Yay.
because like half of the episode, he's like, as you would be, ma'am, would you please do as you're told? And then the second half of the episode, he is like action hero, the pivot, the turn, the over the table. Like we're 100% on board the Nest
Mhm.
ship. But while we wait for it to dock and arrive on our screens, we have a little time. And I feel like this storyline is like, this is the kind of pleasant kind of storyline you want. And I think the moment I was really sold was that scene where they had in the doorway of the office. And he said,
Mhm.
he congratulated, no, he said, thank you. Nancy just dropped any kind of decorum she had. It was like totally like almost like schoolgirl kind of like shaky. She first of all she didn't know what to do with being thanked, but at the same time she was like, "Whoa, he's like looking at me and thanking me, and oh my god, what am I supposed to do?" It was like so natural. Some of the later stuff were like you said, sneezing or whatever. They kind of I feel like occasionally they have to dumb the character down for the plot and do
Mm.
something they wouldn't normally do. Of course, you're going to sneeze, but like it was an accentuated sneeze. Um, so yeah, but like. On that note, I do want to credit Nancy Drew for always trying different things with what could be predictable storylines. You're like, oh no, Nancy's going to be dumbed down and walk into a trap. But no, they made a storyline out of it. Agent Park did not reprimand her for it. He was totally like, we all make mistakes as long as you're okay. That was a pleasant take on it. That was a pleasant turn. And that made me like him even more. And then the fact that I think did he get injured by one of the nails or
I think
did he?
so. Because
Yeah,
his arm is wrapped.
exactly. And I noticed that beforehand. And I don't know whether that was the actor's choice or just like a moment they said stick in. But Nancy was like, we're okay, right? He was like, yeah. And then kind of grabbed the bottom off his coat. I was like, what are we doing here? And then later on, we see that it's actually bandaged up, never made a story about it. They mentioned his shaking, but they never actually referenced the fact that he got injured. So they're being more subtle about what could be really obvious storylines. And I just wanted to say that there's another one, and I'll bring it up later when it comes back to me. I can't remember what it was, but this episode, it subverted your expectations. Nancy's used to doing that, but this was a more like in your face kind of subversion. And I just wanted to say I really appreciate it the way it did that.
Yeah, and it's a very investigative episode, and it's not just her doing the investigation work. Like
Hmm.
you have, like she's is working in tandem with Park, and they are coming to some conclusions about this frozen heart killer. But also, while she's doing that, Ace and Nick are sciencing at, at the
Yeah.
claw, and I'm just like so that they can give her the means of how the heart has been removed. And
Hmm.
I really enjoyed that they were in their goggles and their gloves, and they had the what was it, nitrogen, like that they
Yeah,
were,
I think so.
yeah, that they were putting it into. And I'm just like, I love the balance. Nancy Drew is another show that is really good at balancing all the plots that it's doing.
Hmm.
So the fact that Nancy's not alone working on the case, that she's got her friends working too, so she can provide information. And then you have the unexpected team up between her and Temperance, which she just has to allow because we have to get further on the case. I will say the help to go into the memories was another part where I was like, why would she go to Temperance's house again? But okay.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I like the fact that they're playing the long game with Nancy and Temperance. We don't know what Temperance's purpose is yet, but they're not afraid to have them interact once in a while, which I appreciate it. But at the same time, that happened. Nancy was kind of scarred by that experience. So she was like, you know what? I'm out of here. But they're keeping Temperance relevant by bringing Bess into the storyline now,
Mhm.
which is something I also appreciate it. And to go back, I think it was Reed that said last week that he doesn't know what they're doing with Bess yet, and we hope that she has more than just this random dating storyline. And
Mhm.
now we find that Bess has a purpose. So yet again, thank you, Nancy Drew, for solving these problems very, very quickly. Is Bess a witch, or is she going to like tie in the supernatural? Because regardless of what Bess's storylines have been, she's always played a bit of a supporting role, even
Mhm.
when she was, I don't want to say she was getting in with the Marvins, but even when she was like being the Marvins were a family and she was like learning to know more about them, that was very much Owen driven, Elizabeth's driven. There was always a storyline going on there. Now Bess seems to be at the center of a storyline and could end up being the most important part of it. And I'm really excited to see what that means for, especially after Temperance's prophecies and said how one of them could be the downfall of all of them. Could Bess be the downfall of all of them if she's starting to learn more about her powers and she's working with Temperance,
Hmm.
who we don't know is good or bad? So there's a lot to work with there. And like I said earlier, Nancy keeps subverting storylines. And before I go on far too much, the one thing I did want to remember was the other thing I mentioned earlier was about how it keeps subverting storylines. Nick and George, the storyline where George lost the ring, I was like, how many shows feel the need to do this storyline? But in the end, George didn't lose the ring. Her sister took it, and then that ended up becoming a real meaningful conversation involving Nick
Mhm.
becoming part of the family. So this storyline plays with things we don't like and turns them things into we that we do like. And again, that takes talent, and I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate that.
It does, and I think to be able to put a storyline about family in a episode that has a lot to do was an interesting choice, and I think that it works well
Hmm.
because we haven't really touched on how George's sisters feel about
Hmm.
her going on a separate journey than them because she's older and she's in a committed relationship, and she's going to get married. And I liked that Nick being Nick, because he's like the best dude, like just really wants her sisters to feel secure in in this whole dynamic they've got going on, to the point where he is even willing to lie about what happened to the ring. And I like that George's sister went ahead and said what had happened. So then we could get to the root of the issue, because it's a family of women. Like they don't
Hmm.
generally have any men there full time. And so of course they would be wondering whether or not George is going to be just like their mom. And now that she has a man in her life, she's basically going to abandon them. George has never shown signs of that. but they're children. And like, and this is I think that's the middle child, right? I forget her name.
I think so, yes.
That
They're
was
not
a
in it enough. They're
no,
not in it enough.
but yeah, I think that's this. So she is old enough to remember how Victoria is, but young enough to be concerned about what it means for her in their home dynamic in the way that her older sister wouldn't and the younger sister wouldn't. And I just really, I so enjoyed that. I like that we took the time, even as ridiculous as it was, that we were, I didn't like that they were making Nick feel bad in order to hide that George thought she had lost the ring. But I did like the story around those decisions.
Yeah, and it's funny how it all started because the sisters were being mean to Nick to keep him out of the way of George so that she could find the ring. It all started very much as like a caper, but then we saw what that actually meant to Nick because I really enjoyed the scene between him and Ace where they're like, Ace was like, it's actually misleading the way it says fast freezing because it takes like 20 minutes, and they were like, all right then, and then had that like awkward moment where they're like, okay, well, what do we actually talk about, but we're not in a supernatural caper. And there was a good few seconds, and that's such an S scene, just to not know what to say or whatever. But then he asked Nick a rather unusual and direct question, but it prompted Nick to open up about how what being a member of George's family and getting on with her sisters meant to him. And then that like played into the rest of the story nicely. So again, using such predictable tropes and turning them into golden storylines. Really appreciated that. And I was thinking of you and Reed a lot during the episode because you all have said Nick has such dad energy. Never in my
Yes.
life have I seen that portrayed more in this episode. Like, the way he got on with George's sister so well when he found that she took the ring, he didn't make her feel bad about it, but he did acknowledge why it was wrong and that how he's never going to leave. And then he was willing to not take the fall, but make up a harmless lie that would protect her from not George's wrath, but protect George from the truth so that they wouldn't have to find out what she did. And then I liked the fact that the sister opened up and it became all this almost like heartfelt moment. I almost thought at the moment when George hugged her sister, the two of them looked around, they were going to go like to Nick and bring that would have been a little more on the nose. They did the work with the storyline, and Nick is getting there, and Nick is becoming a member of the family, and yet such a dad through and through. I love that storyline.
I know, and they even like the BTS moment where the sister had taken the phone away.
Yes.
We go back, and that's how he bonds with them by like
Yes.
what's Jungkook's hair color now, and it's like a trick question. It's blonde, and they're like, what? Like it's just such a cute family moment. He's
Mm-hmm.
definitely willing to step in and be another caring figure in their life. And I'm just like, Nick is great. The men on Nancy Drew are just so well written because even the dads had something to do this
Yes.
episode. You have Carson flying off the handle and like Nancy not really wanting to deal with it. And I'm like, Nancy, there's a serial killer who keeps giving you their killings, like they're a cat giving you murder presents, like
Yeah.
like of course he's out here losing his mind, but then you have Ryan wanting to be the cool dad,
Mm-hmm.
and how that can also be like a fallacy, right? Like because she is older and she will manipulate you, and Carson had to read him just a bit, and I appreciated so much that towards the end of the episode Ryan was like, that's not cool. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're really trying to, I thought we were trying to form a bond, and you using me like that wasn't all right. And then Carson comes in and we have this great moment where like Nancy actually has to deal with the repercussions of what she did. And they don't, it doesn't feel, it feels like you need to acknowledge our hurt. And then we need to set so like
Mm-hmm.
directions and boundaries for you to do. And she acknowledges it, even though she's like, I don't know what to do. I can only be me. And they were like, be transparent about what you're doing and we
Mm-hmm.
will try to be okay.
Yeah, and that's another one of them storylines. I'm on so on board with the way they did that because they kind of like accentuated Carson at the start. And was like, I'm checking her phone. Why is she here? Why is she there? And it's like, where are we going with this? And why are we playing it for laughs? And then you knew that Ryan was going to be the cool dad. And we mentioned last week how we like seeing him get involved in the storylines. And he was like, what's the next step? Oh, am I a detective now? What would you usually do from here? But she started lying to him because she was just to protect him. But as we've learned with Nancy, her shutting people out is what ultimately leads to danger and conflict.
Mhm.
And it was so important that she learned the lesson. Ryan learned a bit of a lesson too. So I'm glad that we saw that over accentuated, over the top Carson was actually right in this situation, because he had every right to be concerned about for the show might have played it for laughs at the start, but nothing. I know you can say parents can invade your privacy, and technically that's what he was doing, but he had every right to be concerned because Nancy's a bit reckless. She has gotten over that with her friends, but clearly she still has a way to go when it comes to her dad's now, because that's never a situation she's been in before. Carson's starting to hold on tighter, and I think Ryan realized he wasn't holding on tight enough. Being the cool dad comes with consequences, and he found out what they were, hook, line, and sinker. So I feel like it was such a learning experience for everyone except Carson. Carson knows everything. He is just like, that man is an icon. But I feel like it was such an important scene. And again, not like I said, it's not that George's sister needed to face the wrath of George, because there was love behind what George said. George opened up to her, and I feel like it's the exact same here. Nancy didn't feel the wrath of her dads, but she saw that they were hurt, and she finally saw their points. So I feel like this season is going to be more subtle as far as Nancy's growth goes, because the previous seasons understandably had to hit us over the head with it a little bit, because her growth itself was at the center of the storyline. Whereas now I feel like she's starting to quietly learn things as we're going on. And I think that's right, because at the end of the day, she's been through a lot in the last 2 seasons, and she needs to grow from it. But at the same time, the growth can be slow, growth can be quiet, growth can be subtle. And it's important that she takes on what her dad said. And I can't wait to see where Ryan goes with this, because he still feels like such a fish out of water, being a human that hasn't had everything done for him, that has no access to money, and that the only people in his life deeply care about him and aren't there to say, yes, Ryan, no, Ryan, you're doing that wrong, Ryan. So I think there is so much room to wriggle with all of the characters, and the story keeps playing it in such a clever way that you're like, that's where they went with it by the end of it.
True, and they have these the decision making when you're scared,
Mm-hmm.
is so elevated, and that's what happened with Carson. And then Ryan having to sit in the reality of the choices that he made. I think Nancy not appreciating that she left Ryan in the driveway unawares of what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and truly thinking that he possibly could be the cause of his daughter's death, because he was not aware of the danger she was putting herself in. I think like you always have to get Nancy to slow down, because she's
Mm-hmm.
always like, justice, the case, I know what I'm doing. And like, and when she doesn't know what she's doing, it blows up in her face, literally.
Yeah.
In this in this episode. I did like that she realized later the weight of what she had done, not just in endangering her life, but in Park's life, and to be honest, endangering the lives of her dads, in the sense that they'd be broken having found out that that is what had happened to her. Which I guess when you do make decisions that Carson was making or Nancy was making, it would make sense that Bess is also making bad choices to circle back to her. I will say I didn't quite buy that she'd willingly just be like, yes, temperance help me.
Mm-hmm.
But if I thought about it from the direction of she's absolutely terrified that Ace is not going to take her warnings, and that something is going to happen to him, and he's her family. So like we're willing to dabble in the magic bag, even though we have no idea what we're doing, because ancestry. Perhaps she has this she has a spark, and she messed up the spell, and so she needed Temperance's help. I thought it was interesting that Ace dismissed it, that Bess
Mm.
had even tried to do something to protect him. He's being a bit of a Nancy, in
Yes.
terms of pushing her away when he is aware he's not doing right. Like he wants to believe that Papa Bobbsey is a good dude, and Mr. Bobbsey is not showing that. I did like though that as soon as he saw the blood, he's like, get out of my car.
Mm-hmm.
Like
And
get out.
bless him, he wouldn't make eye contact. He didn't want to do that, but he was like, nope, the line has been drawn, can't do that. That was such an ace moment, because he was like, Bess is right, get him out, get him out, get him out. But he didn't want to look at him, because even then, Ace doesn't like hurting people's feelings. But he was like, nope, can't do this, get out, get out, get out. He was so uncomfortable in that moment. He was like, must abort. And I did appreciate that, because so many TV shows have people go ahead with things and ignore things. Ace was not willing to ignore that, and I really, really like that. And it's funny we talk about bad luck after just watching this Flash episode as well, because per Ace ended up in like a streak of bad luck, and I would have liked to have seen, has that curse been broken? Has Beth started a new one? You know what I mean? Like we
Mhm.
didn't. Is endured a lot of bad luck there, and yet the moment it was spoken into the atmosphere, it all stopped. And I was like, I would have liked to have seen us go a bit more here, but that's because Ace has gone very Nancy about the situation, and no, no, that's not supernatural. Couldn't possibly be. And I mean, they're rubbing off on each other, and I mean, like that's good considering where the season's going. It's good that they're not breaking, but giving him and Nancy a bit of room to breathe on their own, because Ace has such great dynamics with Nick, with Bess, while obviously Nancy has such great dynamics with her dads as well. And then George was kind of stuck in the middle of everyone this week, which was nice to say. They're letting the cast breathe because we know Nancy and Ace are going to find their way to each other. We know Bess and Ace are going to be involved in this storyline, whatever this is. And we know Ace and Amanda is going to come back up. There's so much room to go, but this is how you do a 13 episode season, right? It had so much stakes in its second episode, but yet it paired off in different dynamics and it worked. And I don't know where Bess is going to go now. It's an interesting storyline for her because she's always been so like light-hearted and so like
Mhm.
heartfelt and humble. So where does Bess being a dark sorcerer of magic or a good sorcerer of dark magic, we don't know yet, lead in? Like, is she the downfall of her friends? I'm excited to see what kind of role Temperance plays. But like I said, I feel like Nancy will be her main priority as the season goes on. So I like the fact that Nancy was kind of scarred by the fact that she invaded her mind and then is like, yep, not doing that again, and left her. So that lets Temperance focus on Bess for a little while. Not really sure where we're going, but very much like we said about Superman and Lois, there's a lot of new and different dynamics this season that I'm really starting to like.
I do wonder if Bess is going to be, well, she's a novice right now, but
Hmm.
she's a character who kind of just throws herself into situation hoping for the best. And I'm just like, I don't know how the magical system is going to work in Nancy Drew, but typically there is a cost. And like it's bright and shiny to her right now. And I'm like, Bess, there's a like what you put out in the universe, like well, what the universe gives you in magical systems, you have to give back. What are you going to give back to this magical system? It might not work like that on Nancy Drew. I have
Hmm.
a feeling it will, though. And that is the thing that I am concerned about because you can't just keep taking. There's
Yeah.
something that has to be returned.
Yeah, as we've learned on Nancy Drew, magic, or as we learned on Once Upon a Time, and Nancy Drew, actually, magic comes at a cost. And I feel I don't know what the cost is going to be, but I cannot get that prophecy that, or uh, fortune telling that Temperance did last season out of my head, and that, or last week out of my head, that feels like, is Bess going to be the downfall of her friends? Is this what's going to lead to that? Everyone seems to have a very poor outlook based on
Mhm.
Temperance's cards. So who has worst? Is it Bess, or is Bess the one responsible for everyone else's downfall? I just feel like this is such a like tricky storyline, and I'm going to look forward to how they kind of handle it because, like I said, Bess is light, she's sweetness, she's hard. How do you do that with magic? And they do say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and she's very much doing this out of love. She's very much doing this to protect Ace. But will the consequences of this be far worse than what Ace is about to endure at the hands of Amanda's dad? I don't know. But also, what was with the light bubble going into the cat at the end of the episode? I mean, what are we doing with this?
I don't know. I was so distracted because I was like, "Ooh, cat," because I love cats. But like, but also, I was like, "Who's from?" One to know if it's a regular cat for one. For two, if
Mm,
it's not, who's? I'm assuming that's Temperance familiar, and if that's her
mm,
familiar, like in what sense? Because it depends. I love magic. I'm just gonna say I love magical plots. So I'm like, if it's her familiar, either that is a being that helps her with everything and can potentially talk or like do a voice in her head, or it's her magic carrier. Like
mm.
the cat is around for a specific purpose. So or it could actually be somebody trapped in an animal. It really just depends. This is the part of Nancy Drew that I'm really excited about. Like I told y'all when we finished the season 2 finale, the fact that magic is here has me like elated. It's my
Mhm.
favorite version of paranormal slash supernatural storytelling. So we'll see what they do on Nancy Drew. But I hope we come back to that cat, and I want to know its name.
Yes, yeah. I feel like, am I wrong in thinking, did the first episode of the season end with Temperance operating on a cat? Was it?
Yes, she
It
kissed
was.
it. I wonder if
It
that's
was the
that cat.
dude's. Yeah, it was the dude's cat who got his heart taken out. Didn't he have it in like a kennel kind of cage thing?
Hmm.
And then it was missing, and then Temperance had it. And did she kill it? Was it dead by the frozen heart killer? And did she put a different soul or a power into its body? I don't know. But now I didn't even realize that until we were talking about it. Is the cat the big storyline of the season? Where are we going with this?
Maybe. Oh, that'd be interesting. But I just realized that cat from the opener, I think, is cream. And this was a gray
Okay.
cat. And I think a
Okay.
different breed too. But
That makes sense. But Temperance loves cats one way or another.
well, I don't know about cat organs. So I don't know if that was like a spleen or a lung or a heart that she took out. But I'm assuming it was meant to be used for a spell of some kind.
This is the side of magic I don't like, the gruesome side.
The gruesome side. She was like la la la, getting a heart from a cat. But like unless she brought her own cat back, who knows? And I think this is getting away from us, the cat talk. But just to wrap up, Nancy, the text message that she sent to Ace because they're going to some type of convention. Are we getting a nice episode for episode 3?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. It would make up because they had like no interactions at all in this episode much. Although Nancy did say, "What's with the eye?" when he had the frozen piece of the eye. No one answered that question, and then she just walked off, and that poor man was standing there, and no one asked how he was. But I would like to see them back together now for an adventure, because regardless of where the storyline's going, that show is never better than when those two are on the screen solving something together. They have an incredible dynamic, and we know where it's going, but regardless of what you want to call their dynamic currently, probably the best kind of like bestie, confidant relationship chemistry on the show. And the show thrives when the two of them are solving something together. So I hope we get to see that. I love the fact that they have like a detective con in the same way Riverdale had serial killer con. So the CW loves its cons. So if we have a nice episode next week, that would be a great way, because the season is going in such the right direction, and I would love to see even more of that with a nice episode.
If we have a nice episode, Reed's gonna lose his mind.
Oh yes.
He's gonna be so excited. But wow, we've come to the end of like our watch section, which, superhero heavy. Like, it was DC TV, but like you said, Nancy's her own superhero, so it all fits together.
Superhero edition.
Superhero edition. But that's the end of this week's pod. I'm Sabrina.
And I'm Michael.
We're the CW Spiral. See y'all.